It did not attack. It just stood in the shadows and waited for insomnia itself to force us to kill each other. Elias felt the truth of that sentence rattling in his teeth before he even had a name for the thing standing at the edge of the clearing. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress in the Blackwood cabin, his eyes burning with a dry, sandy heat. It was only 3:00 a.m. on the first night of their digital detox, but the silence of the Appalachian woods had already been replaced by something far worse. It was a sound that was not a sound. A low, subsonic thrum that vibrated in the floorboards and seemed to pulse directly against his eardrums. It felt like the air itself was heavy, leaning against the cabin walls with a rhythmic, suffocating pressure. Elias stood up, his joints protesting with a stiffness that felt premature. He walked into the small common area where Mark, the self-appointed leader of their group, was staring at a dead wood stove. Mark had been the one to find this place on an obscure forum, promising a week of real connection away from the hum of the city. Now, Mark looked like a man trying to hear a secret whispered from miles away. His jaw was locked tight. "Do you hear that?" Elias asked, his voice sounding thin and foreign in the cramped room. Mark did not look up. "It's the wind in the chimney, Elias. Or maybe the old generator in the shed cycling down. Stop being a headcase. We just got here." "It's not the wind. It's making my chest tight," Elias countered. He looked toward the window. Outside, the forest was a wall of impenetrable ink, but he felt a distinct sensation of being observed. It was not the neutral gaze of a deer or the predatory hunger of a bear. It was a patient, cold intelligence. The choice felt simple then: leave. They had 2 SUVs parked 20 yards away. They could be back on the main road in 2 hours, find a motel with humming air conditioners and flickering neon signs, and forget this valley ever existed. Elias grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter, the metal cold and reassuring in his palm. He went to the door, but Mark stood up, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the floor. "If we leave now, we lose the deposit, and we prove exactly what everyone says about us," Mark said, his voice dropping into a low, manipulative register. "That we resoft, that we ca not handle 3 hours without a cell tower. Sarah and Ben are finally sleeping. You want to wake them up because you re-scared of a hum?" Elias looked at the door, then at Mark. The social pressure felt as thick as the subsonic vibration. He did not want to be the one who broke the group. He did not want to be the coward. He dropped the keys back on the counter with a dull clack. "Fine. One night. But if it does not stop by morning, we redone." Mark nodded, a smug, tired smile touching his lips. He walked over to the kitchen sink to pour a glass of water, but as he tilted the pitcher, he froze. Elias followed his gaze. In the reflection of the dark window glass above the sink, a pair of pale, unblinking eyes stared back from the tree line. They were not glowing. They were reflecting the dim light of the cabin with a terrifying, human-like clarity. Elias spun around to look out the actual window, his heart hammering against his ribs, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, just the dark. And then the back door, which Elias had locked personally 10 minutes ago, drifted open an inch with a slow, agonizing creak. By the end of the second night, the vibration had become a physical weight. Elias had not slept for 48 hours. Whenever he closed his eyes, his brain jerked him awake with a violent jolt, convinced that his heart had stopped beating. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls leaning inward as if the forest were slowly squeezing the structure. Sarah sat at the wooden table, her sketchbook open, but she was not drawing landscapes anymore. She was filling page after page with jagged, repetitive lines that looked like the teeth of a saw. Her cuticles were raw and bleeding from constant picking. "I saw it again," Elias whispered, leaning against the kitchen counter. His vision was beginning to fray at the edges, manifesting gray, flickering shapes in his peripheral vision. By the shed, taller than a man. It does not move, Mark. It just stands there. Mark did not even look at him. He was obsessed with the floorboards, kneeling in the center of the room with a flashlight, trying to find the source of the thrumming. "There's nothing out there, Elias," I checked the perimeter. There are no tracks. You re-hallucinating because you re-weak. Your brain is misfiring. I'm not the only one, Elias snapped, gesturing toward Ben, who was standing in the corner of the room, staring at a blank wall. Ben had not spoken since noon. He just stood there, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. Elias decided he'd had enough. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, but when he stepped out onto the porch, the air hit him like a frozen curtain. The hum was louder out here, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to sync with his own pulse. He ran toward his SUV, his boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. He reached the driver's side door and pulled the handle, but it did not budge. He pressed the unlock button on his fob, but the lights did not flash. He looked through the window and felt his stomach drop into a cold abyss. The interior of his car was filled with dirt. It was packed tight from the floorboards to the ceiling, a solid mass of forest earth and dead leaves, as if the car had been buried underground for a century and then spit back out. He ran to Marcus' car, then Ben's. They were all the same, packed solid. There was no way to get the keys in the ignition, let alone drive. He turned back toward the cabin, and that S when he saw the figure. It was leaning against a birch tree 30 feet away. It was spindly and gray, with limbs that were slightly too long for its torso. It wore no clothes, but its skin had a matte, bark-like texture. It did not have a mouth, or if it did, the skin was fused shut. But the eyes were there, wide, wet, and filled with a devastatingly patient intelligence. It was not coming for him. It was just watching him realize that he was trapped. Elias scrambled back inside the cabin, slamming the door and sliding the bolt home. He was screaming for Mark, for anyone, but when he turned around, he stopped dead. Ben was no longer standing in the corner. He was standing behind Sarah with a heavy iron fire poker in his hand. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, tears streaming down his face. "It's the only way to make it quiet," Ben whispered, his voice cracking. "The sound is coming from her, Elias. I can hear it moving behind her teeth. If I just open her up, the noise will stop. We can finally sleep." Elias lunged forward, grabbing Ben's arm just as he raised the poker. They tumbled to the floor, a chaotic mess of limbs and desperate grunts. Sarah screamed, a high, piercing sound that seemed to harmonize with the subsonic thrumming, making Elias's head explode with pain. Mark finally intervened, pinning Ben to the floor with a brutal efficiency that felt far too practiced. "Everyone shut up," Mark roared. He looked at Elias, his face a mask of exhaustion and buried rage. "There is no monster, Elias. There is no dirt in the cars. You all having a collective psychotic break because you see not handle a little sleep deprivation. I looked out the window. The cars are fine. Go look again." Elias shouted, his voice hoarse. "Go look at the dirt, Mark. Look at the thing in the trees." Mark walked to the door, swung it open, and stepped out. Elias held his breath, waiting for the scream, waiting for the realization. But Mark just stood there for a long minute. When he turned back, his expression was blank. "The cars are empty, Elias. The woods are empty. You the one doing this. You the one making that noise. I saw you humming in your sleep. You trying to ruin this for us." In that moment, Elias saw the truth, and it was more terrifying than any ghost. The sound was not just a frequency. It was a wedge. It was finding the fractures in their personalities and prying them open. For Ben, it was violence. For Mark, it was a delusional need for control. The entity outside was not an apex predator that hunted with claws. It was a scavenger that fed on the wreckage of the soul. It was a catalyst. Elias retreated to the kitchen, his mind racing. He needed a weapon or a way out. But as he reached for a knife, he saw Sarah's sketchbook again. She had stopped drawing lines. On the final page, she had drawn a perfect map of the cabin's floor plan. There were 4 X marks, one for each of them. And then, there was a 5th mark, a circle located exactly where the wood stove stood. Underneath the drawing, Sarah had written one sentence in a tiny, cramped hand. "The hum is a heartbeat, and we are the blood." Elias looked at the wood stove. He realized that the subsonic vibration was loudest right there. He knelt down, ignoring Marcus' threats and Ben's sobbing, and began to tear at the loose stones of the hearth. He expected to find a speaker, a machine, something man-made. Instead, he found a cavity filled with old, yellowed bones. Human bones, hundreds of them, packed into the foundation of the house. They were vibrating. They were acting as a resonator for the natural frequency of the valley, amplified by the very structure of the cabin. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The cabin was not a shelter. It was an instrument, and the thing outside was the player. "Look!" Elias cried out, pointing at the bones. "This is why we see not sleep. It is a trap." But Mark did not see the bones. He saw Elias destroying his cabin, his perfect retreat. Mark's face twisted into something monstrous. He grabbed the fire poker that Ben had dropped. "I told you to stop, Elias. I told you you were the problem." Mark lunged. Elias scrambled back, his heels catching on the uneven floor. He was at his lowest point, trapped in a cabin built on a bed of bones, pursued by his best friend who had been turned into a puppet by a sound he could not even hear correctly. He looked out the window one last time. The figure was closer now, standing just outside the glass. It tapped a long, gray finger against the pane. Tap, tap, tap. It was the same rhythm as the hum. It was a countdown. As the iron poker whistled through the air, narrowly missing his temple, Elias did not fight back. He did not try to explain the bones again. In the white-hot flash of adrenaline and near death, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over him. He realized that the entity was feeding on their resistance. Mark was resisting the reality of the danger. Ben was resisting the noise. Sarah was resisting the fear. Their struggle was the fuel for the vibration. Elias stopped moving. He let his body go limp, falling to his knees as Mark raised the poker for a final, killing blow. "Kill me then, Mark," Elias said, his voice quiet and perfectly steady. He looked directly into Marcus' bloodshot, unseeing eyes. "But it will not stop the noise. It will only make it louder for you. You'll be alone in the dark with it, and you'll never ever sleep again." Mark froze. The poker trembled in his hand. The logic of the threat pierced through the layers of his delusion. For the first time in 3 days, the subsonic thrum seemed to falter, skipping a beat like a dying engine. Elias did not wait. He stood up slowly and walked toward the door. He did not grab his keys. He did not grab a jacket. He simply unbolted the door and stepped out into the night, leaving his friends and the cabin behind. He walked straight toward the figure by the birch tree. He did not feel brave. He felt hollowed out, as if the insomnia had scraped away everything that made him a person, leaving only a witness. He stopped 3 feet away from the entity. Up close, it smelled like wet earth and ancient, stagnant water. Its eyes were vast, reflecting the entire universe of the dark forest. Elias did not scream. He did not run. He simply sat down on the cold ground, closed his eyes, and surrendered. He stopped fighting the noise. He stopped trying to stay awake. He invited the vibration to take him, to consume his fear, to do whatever it wanted. The silence that followed was deafening. The subsonic thrum did not just fade. It snapped, like a tension wire being cut. Elias felt a sudden, profound lightness in his chest. When he opened his eyes, the gray figure was gone. The forest was just a forest, indifferent, quiet, and dark. He looked back at the cabin. The lights were flickering, and he could hear the distant, muffled sound of Mark and Sarah weeping, the sound of people finally waking up from a shared nightmare. Elias stood up and walked to his SUV. He pulled the handle. It opened. The interior was clean, the leather seats smelling faintly of pine and old coffee. There was no dirt. There was no monster. He drove out of the valley as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the canopy. He did not look back at the cabin. He knew his friends would survive, but he also knew they would never be the same. They had seen the cracks in themselves, and those cracks never truly heal. Elias reached the main highway and pulled into a rest stop. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, his eyes finally heavy with a natural, honest exhaustion. He was safe. He had won. But as his eyelids began to flutter shut, he heard a sound. A tiny, rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the roof of his car. He did not open his eyes. He knew what it was. The thing had not needed to kill him. It had simply followed him home. Because once you heard the sound of the bones, you belong to the silent places, and sleep is just a temporary place to hide. Elias drifted off to sleep, knowing that when he woke up, the eyes would be waiting in the shadows of his own bedroom, patient and unblinking, waiting for the next time he forgot how to be afraid.